can you help me start a podcast? And I was like, yeah, actually, I can. I know how that works. I know how to do all that.
Welcome to episode 13 of Opportunity Knocks. I'm your host, Todd Patton, and today in the Sprinter, we have the one and only Sebastian Rusk. So Sebastian and I connected probably 10 years ago, it must have been, maybe longer than that, probably 12. Yeah. And we were both doing social media at the time. We were doing a little SEO. We were both kind of in the same game. And Sebastian would always come to me and say, Patton, you got to focus on podcasts. I go, podcast? Remember, this is 10 years ago. It wasn't really popular then. He was all in on it. And since then, he's built an unbelievable business around podcasting. So, Sebastian, it's great to have you, man. Miss you. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it has been. I was telling you earlier, our mutual friend, Rodney Barretto, had shared a clip from one of your previous episodes. I was like, wait a second, Todd's got a Sprinter van? I haven't talked to him in years. I need to catch up with him. And, here we are. So thanks for having me, man.
It's great to have you here, man. So take me back now. So when you started putting that in my ear about podcasting, what was what made you think that podcasting was the future of communication?
Well, I think it really all started when social media came about. When I'll never forget being in New York City, standing in Times Square in like 2013, which was a little bit after I had first started, and everyone's looking down at their phones. They weren't, and I'm standing in the advertising mecca of the world, and everyone's looking down at their phones. And I thought, wow, what an incredible shift in how we communicate that's taking place right now. And I never forgot that. And as social media continued to become more and more relevant, now it's like everyone woke up, I think, during the pandemic and was like, okay, this stuff's not going anywhere. I'm going to write a book, become a speaker, and I'm an entrepreneur now. But for those of us that have been working at it for a minute now, I met Gary Vee in 2011, and I was very fortunate to know him in the early days, and he put me on to the idea of being able to build a personal brand in addition to building a business. And I always viewed social media as the new medium of how we now communicate and how we now do life and how we're going to continue to get the word out on there. When we look at YouTube is the new TV and podcasting is the new radio, that's just as things have always continued to evolve. That's what it's evolved into. And when I started with social media, it was great in the very beginning, very rough. But it was good because it was the wild, wild west. Nobody knew who Gary was, and nobody really cared about social media. So I was evangelizing, your brand needs to be on Facebook, and people are like, huh? What? I hang out on Facebook personally, but not business-wise. So as we continue to look at this shift of where we were at, Social Buzz, I was able to get that business off the ground from literally nothing and built it into something. And, I did that for about 6 years. And then I was like, I hate what I do. I hate it. I later realized after doing some deep work on myself that I just hated myself.
And that was social media marketing. You were managing. Yeah. So people were hiring you to manage their Facebook page there. Yeah. And that was not, even though you knew that was it.
It was okay.
It didn't get you going.
I had this nudge. It's like, there's more there. There's more there, both personally and professionally. So in 2016, I met a girl on a dating app, and we met for a beer up in Fort Lauderdale on Las Olas, American Social, March 1st, 2016. I'll never forget it. And she introduced me to this personal development course that she was in. And I was like, oh, I know all about personal development. Tony Robbins, Landmark Forum. I'm a personal development expert. Just ask me. It's a total lie, right? I went to personal development. I didn't shit when I got out of it. That year, she was able to get me through the doors of this training that's no longer around anymore. It was called Gratitude Training. And that course gave me a real in-depth look of myself to see what was really off there. Do you hate what you're doing, or do you hate yourself? And can't find I just hated myself and past, and we've all got our shit and our baggage and all that stuff. And I realized that until I can get rid of whatever needs to get shed, I'm not going to be able to step into whatever role it is that's out there for me business-wise. So I took the majority of 2016 off unplanned. How I got through the years beyond me, but the only way out is through, I kept telling myself. And at the end of all of that, she broke up with me in the middle of the training, as if personal development wasn't difficult enough. Had a little heartbreak in the mix there. But when I came out of that, I learned how to love myself, learned how to be fully accountable for my life, stop blaming mom, stop blaming dad, realize that every single thing that happens in my life is my fault, my responsibility. And as long as I own that and realize that, life's going to be just that much easier. I don't want to say easier, just that much easier. And I got done with all that. I'm like, okay, now that I'm out of this and like, let's dust myself off, let's figure out what we're going to do with business. Like Social Buzz was hanging on by a thread because my heart and head just weren't in it anymore.
And you weren't in the right spot, it sounds like. But you know what?
I didn't want to do the bow tie anymore. I didn't want to MC anymore. I didn't want to, there's social media marketing companies popping up all over the place. And
But I give you a lot of credit for that. I mean, I want to stop you there for a second because a lot of other people, you know, there's a stigma around saying something's wrong with you. It's easy to blame the social media industry, but for you to do that, man, I give you a lot of credit, and I hope that can inspire. I
kicked and screamed all the way into it. I mean, I was interested in her, you know, but I'm a man of faith. Sometimes I think that, you know, God puts people in your life to wake you up, and get your attention, and it's going to happen in any capacity possible. And she had my full attention enough to get me through those doors, and I was resistant to it all, as we all are resistant to change on there. But you know, somebody asked me years ago when I first started, you know, who's missing out because you're not showing up? And that changed everything for me. That was the beginning of Social Buzz and everything. And I continued to remember that. And I thought, how am I continuing to show up? And how do I continue to become the best version of myself so I can then bring that to the world and go impact people? Because what I get to do these days, we help people launch a podcast and we do all the logistical stuff with it. That's cool and everything. But I get to see people step into a completely different version of themselves because they started a podcast. And that's the real differentiator there. And that's what really fills my cup. But I did it out of complete desperation to get out of how do you leave the digital marketing industry and still stay in it? So when I got done with that taking the year off in 2016, I went and rented a desk around the corner here in a co-working space. And I ran into a friend of mine, Claudia Sayan, who I met at the Women's Success Summit years ago. And which I think is where you and I
Michelle Villalobos.
Yeah, that's where we met, I think. We were on a panel together or something. And I ran into her. She had an internet radio show. And she was like, I was like, how's that going? She's like, great. And I'm like, what does it do? And she's like, well, I'm like, you couldn't answer my question. So why don't you start a podcast? And she's like, I don't know how to do that. Can you help me start a podcast? And I was like, yeah, actually, I can. I know how that works. I know how to do all that. And man, that was November 2016. I literally have not looked back since that day. I went back upstairs. I mapped out what would become the Podcast Launch Lab, which is a turnkey podcast launch solution.
Do you still have that?
To take
the launch lab? Yeah, that's your main. That's the business.
That's it. That's where it all started.
So if anybody wants to launch a podcast, start a podcast, they go to what's the website?
They hit me up, podcastlaunchlab.com. You can schedule a call, and
then and there's options they have. They could either you could handle it for them, or is it something that they could do?
Well, you got two options with us. You hire us, you run through our 90-day program, we get you launched and support you for a minimum of 12 months. Or you go read my book, go to my YouTube channel, and figure it out on your own, which I don't recommend doing. Because podcasts that are started on your own with no support, us thinking our ideas are the best, aren't always the best place to do it. But yeah, man, that was the beginning. I literally, when she said that to me, the antennas went up. I went back upstairs to my rented desk and I wrote out what will become the Podcast Launch Lab, which is a turnkey podcast launch solution, take you from idea to iTunes in 90 days or less with our proven podcast launch solution. And dude, I'm undefeated with launching podcasts. The only time a podcast doesn't get launched is because somebody drops the ball and doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
But I'm deeply passionate.
Why do you think that is? Why do people drop the ball and not do anything? Is it fear of being on camera? Is it, well, we say podcasts, it's funny. You think podcasts are the big part of it is the camera, but it's really just audio. Yeah. So if somebody doesn't want to be on camera, a podcast is perfect for them, right?
Well,
and if they want to be on it, it's still good.
I mean, it helps with communication, public speaking, getting over fear, silencing the inner critic. I mean, it helps with a lot of things. Those are really the core things that we work on in the very beginning, is being able to get people out of a space of, I don't know, I can do this.
So let me ask you about that, because that's interesting. You said in 2016, when that shift happened, you were not all in on, I guess, inner belief, I guess we'll say. And now you're a stand-up comedian. Yeah. You have a podcast show. How did that, is it something that you think you were born with, or is it something that you've just trained yourself to?
Yeah. God-given gift. Yeah. 100%. And now it's a process of continuing to refine that process, constantly refining the talent, revising it. You're only good as your last talk. You're only as good as your last comedy set. You're only as good as your last book. You're only as good as, just like sales, but in the world of business and business development and life development, I think it's become my life's work, at least for now, until there's something, that's next. But I got grand plans for this thing. I mean, we've been able to, yet another thing that, I run around town in 2016 telling everybody to start a podcast. And everyone's like, you're nuts. No one wants a podcast. No one wants a podcast. And here we are 8 years later, and we've turned this into a multiple 6-figure a year business. And I have a great life. It's fantastic. I mean, and I was on the struggle bus for a long time in that social media world. Now things I haven't made it. Made it, in my opinion, is I've got more money than I'll ever be able to spend. And I'm out there making a greater impact in the world, leaving the world a better place. And, we're well on our way to being able to go do that. But it took this, it's like life is a perpetual flow of staying uncomfortable and being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Well, it sounds like you take advantage of opportunities. Listen, the podcast is called Opportunity Knocks, right? And it sounds like Gary V was knocking at the door, right? You answered it, and you focused on that relationship when he wasn't who he is today. And it sounds like even that girl that you dated was knocking on the door, and you answered it, and you went to the seminar. And that's the key, I think, with this podcast, is to find out when opportunity knocks, what you did to take advantage of it. Failure is okay. It's okay to fail. Look, you didn't finish the course, right? The seminar, I guess. Or did you finish it?
Yeah, I did finish it. I didn't finish the final third part, which was like another 90-day extended thing. I'm like, I've had enough. Yeah. I got what I came here for, which is like, the unfucking of like the human experience.
Yeah.
And after that, I was like, okay, got it. Now it's time to get out there and go do something. And the things that I was able to experience and learn through that are the things that I bring back to the stage.
So is there anything you can give as far as a tip or an advice or anything? And I know you've written books and you've got, the show, your show, you got this, but is there something as a takeaway somebody could say, if they're saying, you know what, right now, I'd love to do a podcast, but I'm not, and outside of obviously hiring you or having you do it, but is there anything, is it a mindset thing? Is it just buy the equipment and just give it a shot? Is there any like tips you could give to somebody?
I mean, you don't know that whether or not it's going to work. I mean, get in there and start figuring out, like, do you even like it? Do you even want to do it? Why are you doing it is the number one thing. Like, why are you starting a podcast? If you're starting a podcast because everyone else is doing it, it's kind of like everything else in life. Why in the world do you want to do something because everybody else is doing it? You got to separate yourself from the crowd and be able to say, I'm starting a podcast because I want to fill in the blank. And, once you get clear on that why, then you're anchored in that why. And that why is what carries you on and really motivates you to keep going.
Love that. So, and that's ultimately what your podcast is about, whatever that why is, right? So, in other words, if I'm talking about football, you know what? I'm not really into football. It's not going to, even though it's hot, that's not going to be a good podcast. Yeah. But if I'm doing it because what I'm doing is opportunities knocking, helping small business owners take the next step and motivate people, inspire people. Yeah. And I'm doing that by putting successful people in the sprinter and hearing their stories. So I love that, starting with the why. So that's
And if you're starting a podcast for your business, a podcast is the ultimate networking tool. It gets you in front of people that you want to do business with. People love their ego stroked. Interviewing people on a podcast is a phenomenal way to stroke their ego, get in front of them, build a relationship with them, and do business with them. Secondly, a podcast solves all of your social media content problems. One podcast episode, multiple pieces of micro content shared daily on a daily basis on social media, keeps you in the news feed, keeps you top of mind. When you're top of mind and people need what you do, guess what? They reach out, they call you, and they hire you.
And you become the authority.
Correct.
So it checks all those boxes. And not only that, with the content wise, there's 4 pieces of content: video, audio, text, and image. And you get all of it here. So we're getting video. We got the audio, obviously. Yeah. We're taking pictures. We got that. And then we get the text just by turning it into a blog.
Yeah.
I love it, man. So what's new? What's next for Sebastian Rusk?
We're continuing to scale the agency. The next goal is to get this thing to 7 figures and then figure out, what's next for it. Travel schedule has not slowed down by any stretch of the imagination. So being in the right room at the right time, there's a lot of power in that. Fortunate to have a lot of speaking opportunities that are that kind of overlap into the comedy world too. And I've started to create my own little universe of, speaking, being in the right room, doing comedy, launching podcasts. And those are my 3 non-negotiables. It's like, if it's not speaking, doing comedy, or launching podcasts, I'm just not leaving the house.
And comedy is tough, man. I respect so much for people that can just get up there and it's so hard to make people laugh.
Comedy's easy when it's not expected.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. When they're paying money to see. So where can somebody see you on stage?
Follow me on Instagram. I have a few clips up there. People want the truth. You gotta make them laugh and relate to them in certain ways. So, but there's a few clips on my Instagram. I try to share, here and there. I try to keep the main thing with podcasting, but the comedy is like a pod. If I can make you laugh and you want to start a podcast, I got you forever.
So tell me now, I guess you mentioned next step is you're going to keep growing this business, but is there anything as far as like, I guess, in this podcast world, what do you see next happening? Meaning, is AI going to play a fact? It already is, I know, but what do you see as the next big thing? Because look, you called this 10 years ago. I want to hear what you think is.
Well, I think that AI is going to continue to come in and complement the world of podcasting. I don't think you're going to replace the human experience. I just don't think you're going to do that. You're not going to replace this. I don't want Todd the robot in front of me.
Yeah.
I want Todd.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't think that's going to be replaced. I think there's going to be tools and resources available to be able to make it smoother process to be able to do more things with podcasting. I know YouTube's trying to really go in on trying to figure out podcasting. Why, I don't know, because they're a video platform. I know a lot of people record the video aspect of their podcast and call it a video podcast, but I think they're two completely different animals.
Really?
Yeah. You have video, you got video. You're watching a video.
Yeah.
Audio, you got audio, you're listening to it. So it's all how we consume content. I know younger generations are like, we like to watch everything. So, which is cool. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's here to stay for a while. I mean, I don't see it changing. I think every brand needs a podcast to be able to get the message out.
So going back to AI, because that's a really interesting topic for me, just because it's taken over,
Yeah.
and even though I agree with you that personal connection, but is there anything you're doing now with AI in your podcast business?
Yeah, we do. We use a lot for, a lot of the software that helps out with show notes and transcribing and the micro content. That's huge.
Cut up clips.
Right. To be able to drop a clip in or a video from the recording of the podcast into a software and have it spit back out. And of course, there's some human touch that's still needed with a few things, but it's made things. I mean, back in the day, we're sitting there spending, burning the midnight oil on iMovie. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So I try to identify the tools that are out there. I think show notes, transcription, and micro content tools have been probably the most popular out there. But I don't think there's any like one and done type. Okay, let me go record 5 minutes of my voice and then have. People just don't want to interact with. They're not going to replace the human experience.
Yep. I agree with that. We talked about comedy. We talked about the podcast business, but you also speak. You host at do you still do that or no? I mean, I know the bow tie you mentioned, that was a kind of a signature of you back in the day.
Yeah, the bow tie's retired. Yeah,
retired.
The MC stuff. And
you're not doing the MC?
I'm coming out of it. No, not at all. That was,
really?
I shut that down.
You were great at that, man.
You're the stage bitch, though. That's what you are. You're not. Yeah, I thought it was always, my ego was like, they hired Sebastian Rusk to MC. And technically they did. Right. But it's like, hey, bell to bell, first guy there, last one to leave.
Yeah.
Production meeting, 7 a.m.
Interesting.
Never leave the stage. It's a fucking nightmare. I can show up, crush a 45-minute keynote, shake some hands, kiss some babies, go to a cocktail hour, and I'm on the way home. So it's just way far greater impact too. Everyone always thought I worked for the company too. So the waters got muddied a lot with it, and I hated it.
Yeah.
I'm doing some stuff for the mastermind group that I'm part of in a couple of weeks, but I'm doing that as just kind of team player type of deal.
Well, that's good that you recognize this stuff, and then you get out when you realize, because a lot of times, like it sounded like back in pre-2016, you were staying in it because you're like, I think I should. Now you're realizing,
if I didn't get booked to speak, I wanted to get on that stage.
Yeah.
I thought that getting on that stage would yield more business, and that wasn't true.
Right.
Getting on that stage to speak yields more business, but getting on the stage to MC does not yield more business.
Got it.
Not at all. They think you work for the company. I probably did that for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Probably maybe 4 or 5 years. I got my real start with digitalmarketer.com and traffic and conversions. So I did traffic and conversions for about 4 years, and that kicked open. That ripple effect still happens to this day with traffic and conversions. Like, hey, weren't you the MC 1 year there? But again, that led me. That MC experience led me, because I would MC these events, and I would come home and like I wouldn't have my thing. Like, what's my thing?
Yeah.
And now that I got my thing, I'm like, I don't need to go MC.
Yeah, exactly.
And like,
that's
I need to go speak and talk about my thing.
And the comedy's a fun thing that you like doing. That's a passion project. Man, it's been fun watching you just grow, man, and then see where you're at now. And thanks so much for coming into Sprinter.
Oh, it's great, dude. Thanks for coming down, man.
I'd love to be on your podcast,
Yeah, let's
man.
do it,
See
bro.
you in action.